The geographical region that became China has clear territorial boundaries: the Gobi Desert in the north, dense jungle in the south, while the east and west are bounded by formidable mountains and the sea. Nearly all of the land fit for agriculture in this region is centered around the floodplains surrounding the Yellow River Valley in the north and the Yangtze River in the south. The major early prehistoric cultures of China were centered around the middle and lower Yellow River Valley. These early people were the first to control the unpredictable and dangerous floods of the river valley through sophisticated irrigation techniques. Not long after the first bronze objects were cast in the area of the Yellow River, the Shang rose to power. They left behind a fully formed writing system. The Shang were led by an all-powerful priest king, who ruled over a rapidly increasing population, which expanded in every direction. Much of this growth was fueled by bronze. Armies armed with bronze weapons and armor could conquer and control more territory, and large bronze bells and ritual items demonstrated the wealth and power of the state and the king. Eventually, all of these warring states were unified by China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. China's geographical isolation and distinct natural borders fostered a unique culture, which during the Bronze Age looked at itself as not the greatest civilization, but the only civilization. Beginning in the Zhou dynasty, and perhaps before, they began referring to their own country as the Middle Kingdom, China being the modern name. They viewed the fringe states that surrounded their territory as barbarians who made pale imitations of their own culture.
A lot of the viruses that make us sick actually originate in animals. Some of the viruses that cause the flu come from birds and pigs. HIV/AIDS comes from chimpanzees. The deadly Ebola virus likely originates in bats. And in the case of the 2019 coronavirus, there's some evidence it went from a bat to a pangolin before infecting a human. While viruses are very good at jumping between species, it's rare for a deadly one to make this journey all the way to humans. That's because it would need all these hosts to encounter each other at some point. That's where the Wuhan market comes in. It's a wet market. A kind of place where live animals are slaughtered and sold for consumption.
It was not a surprise at all, and I think that it was not a surprise to many scientists. The cages stack above one over another. Animals at the bottom are often soaked with all kinds of liquid, animal excrement, pus, blood, or whatever the liquid they're receiving from the animals above.
That's exactly how a virus can jump from one animal to another. These animals are from all over the world, and each one has the potential to carry its own viruses to the market. The reason all these animals are in the same market is because of a decision China's government made decades ago. Back in the 1970s, China was falling apart. Famine had killed more than 36 million people, and the communist regime, which controlled all food production, was failing to feed its more than 900 million people. In 1978, on the verge of collapse, the regime gave up this control and allowed private farming. While large companies increasingly dominated the production of popular foods like pork and poultry, some smaller farmers turned to catching and raising wild animals as a way to sustain themselves.
At the very beginning, it was mostly peasant household backyard operation of turtles, for example. That's how wildlife farming started to get off the ground.
And since it started to feed and sustain people, the Chinese government backed it.
So it was imperative for the government to encourage people to make a living through whatever productive activities they can find themselves in. You can lift yourself out of poverty. No matter what you are doing, that's okay.
But then in 1988, the government made a decision that changed the shape of wildlife trade in China. They enacted the Wildlife Protection Law, which designated the animals as resources owned by the state and protected people engaged in the utilization of wildlife resources.
That's one of the most devastating problems of the law, because if you designate the wildlife as a natural resource, that means it is something you can use for human benefits.
The law also encouraged the domestication and breeding of wildlife. And with that, an industry was born. Small local farms turned into industrial-sized operations. For example, this bear farm started with just 3 and eventually grew to more than 1,000 bears. Bigger populations meant greater chances that a sick animal could spread disease. Farmers were also raising a wide variety of animals, which meant more viruses on the farms. Nonetheless, these animals were funneled into the wet markets for profit. While this legal wildlife farming industry started booming, it simultaneously provided cover for an illegal wildlife industry. Endangered animals like tigers, rhinoceroses, and pangolins were trafficked into China. By the early 2000s, these markets were teeming with wild animals when the inevitable happened. In 2003, the SARS outbreak was traced to a wet market here in southern China. Scientists found traces of the virus in farmed civet cats. Chinese officials quickly shut down the markets and banned wildlife farming. But just a few months after the outbreak, the Chinese government declared 54 species of wildlife animals, including civet cats, legal to farm again. By 2004, the wildlife farming industry was worth an estimated 100 billion yuan, and it exerted significant influence over the Chinese government.
Wildlife farming industry was tiny in China's gigantic GDP, but the industry has enormous lobbying capability.
It's because of this influence that the Chinese government has allowed these markets to grow over the years. In 2016, for example, the government sanctioned the farming of some endangered species like tigers and pangolins. By 2018, the wildlife industry had grown to 148 billion yuan and had developed clever marketing tactics to keep the markets around.
The industry has been promoting these wildlife animals. Majority of the people in China do not eat wildlife animals. Those people who consume these wildlife animals are the rich and the powerful, a small minority.
It's this minority that the Chinese government chose to favor over the safety of the rest of its population.
These parochial commercial interests of small number of wildlife eaters are hijacking China's national interest.
Soon after the coronavirus outbreak, the Chinese government shut down thousands of wet markets and temporarily banned wildlife trade again. Organizations around the world have been urging China to make the ban permanent. But unless these actions lead to a permanent ban on wildlife farming, outbreaks like this one are bound to happen again.
This week is going to blow the fucking smithereens up. This week is going to be horrible in terms of numbers of cases. It's going to be exponentially skyrocketing. This is all you're going to see is about COVID-19. These are all the posts you're going to see every time. Please give them a virtual bitch slap. Yes, you luckily recovered, but this is your grandmother. God bless our first responders, our doctors, our nurses, our techs, our phlebotomists, our nursing assistants. God bless them. Right? Because they are starting to suffer burnout. We're getting reports from the Italian doctors now. They are really burnt out. They're all working 100, 110 hour weeks. They are stressed out. They're running out of personal protection equipment. They're worried about passing this on to their own family. We have colleagues, we have doctors and intensivists and nurses who have died now not gotten sick, fucker. Like, quit being a smartass. They have died trying to help your family member, and you won't take this seriously. You still think this is a political thing. You still think this is media hype, and they fucking died trying to help your family member. Okay?
One of them done throughout their career. I know they have the thanks of this president, his vice president, and the American people.
Sir, how can you say that? Concerned about missing a paycheck. How can you say that?
Companies.
Here is my med school diploma. Dr. Vuong, you shouldn't be showing your personal information. Well, shit, this is the same stuff that I would put on my office, right? So I'm a doctor. That's important that you need to know that. And then here's my residency. Do me a favor right now. Please hit share on this video. This is a super important video. We need to have lots of people watching this and spread this information. Okay? All right, we are calling this the novel. Novel means new, not novel like you read. A novel coronavirus means it's a new coronavirus, right? SARS-CoV-2. And because it's new, There is no immunity to this, which means what? Everybody who comes in contact with this virus will catch it, will have some sort of symptoms. It can be mild. There's actually, we're considering there might be some asymptomatic carriers, right? That's a whole different conversation. 80% are going to have mild case of coronavirus. And remember the definition. By mild, we mean you don't need to be hospitalized. So this is not the regular flu. So anybody who says, hey, this is just like the regular flu. No, it's not. This is, you don't need to be hospitalized. That's 80% of people. Okay? You do the math, we don't have enough respirators. Now, why am I talking about respirators? Because that actually has to do with how coronavirus kills. Let's get into this. So coronavirus is a respiratory breathing lung issue. Okay? It's a respiratory illness. But anyway, eventually this virus has to make its way into our oral airway. This oral airway. Okay? Because, and it's a weird, like sometimes we learn anatomy or know about it, but we just don't make the connection. Give me an amen if you've ever studied anatomy, but somehow it just doesn't connect, right? So our mucous membranes, our trachea, our nasal passages, our sinuses all come together in our mouths, goes down our throats, our scrawny chicken neck throats here, and then there's two tubes. One is our esophagus, where our food goes, and one's our trachea, which is where our lungs and our air passes. And that's where you, so people get confused by this. When you burp from your esophagus, your stomach. When you cough from your lungs, your trachea. So this is a respiratory illness. So the virus will make its way into your nose, throat, and then will go into your airways. This is your lungs. Okay? All right? So we're talking about your lungs. Now, I want to do a real quick demonstration. So imagine, Dr. Vuong, what are your lungs? Right here, guys. Okay? Put these here, and actually your lungs actually go up to your clavicles, believe it or not, if you want to be accurately. These aren't quite big enough. But your lungs are huge. So the top of your lungs go up right above your clavicle, your shoulder bone right here. They do. Trust me, they do. And they go way, take a deep breath. Everyone take a deep breath for me. When you do that, your diaphragm pushes down, and your lungs, if you go in your, I might have to jump for this. If y'all can see, way down here, you can feel your ribs. You can feel the bottom of your ribs is right above your belt line, guys. Your lungs go way down here, way down there, past, like almost to your waistline. Those are your ribs. So those are your lungs. Your lungs are huge. So these are small examples. I would really need a bunch all through here, all down through here. You guys get the idea, right? So now you have these two lungs, right? Now watch.
Wash your hands. But when you rinse your hands with just water, it rushes right over the virus. That's because that layer of fat makes the virus behave kind of like a drop of oil. You can see it happening in this demonstration. Oils are just liquid fats. What happens when you pour oil into water? It floats. It doesn't mix. But add soap, and suddenly that fatty oil dissolves into the water. To show why, we ordered this lotion that mimics viruses and their fatty layers. It glows under a UV light. If you just rinse your hands under regular water, nothing comes off. If you wash with soap for just 5 seconds or 10 seconds, your hands are still covered, but 20 full seconds, now the soap is actually destroying the virus.
You hand wash, you kill that little fucker, bacteria, that virus, you kill it, you wash it, then it's gone. Now you touch your face all you want. But maybe you just, because we randomly just kind of do stuff like this all the time. But coronavirus now has made its way, my hands are clean by the way, has made its way now into your mouth, the oral airway, okay? So your body starts to an immune response. And it actually, your immune response, when it starts to rapidly get out of control, is actually how you die. It's your own body trying to save you, ends up really just killing you. Okay? So here we have an alveoli. That's these little air pockets you see in your lungs, okay? These microscopic air pockets here, all right? Your alveoli then brings in fluid. How this really kills you. Okay, now watch me now. Like, deep breath, expands, gets smaller. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. It gets oxygen exchange. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Does that make sense? Exhale, inhale. And suddenly, this coronavirus is going to come in, cause this massive inflammatory response. Watch this. And now your lung gets full. Oh, hell. Look at that. Gets full of liquid. At first, you can still work, all right? It's still working. I'm about to make a huge mess. As more and more fluid comes into your lung and you try to take a deep breath, look, it stiffens. When you have fluid into your lungs, does this make sense? It stiffens. It can't move. It can't move, all right? It can't get rid of the fluid. So your little alveoli ends up looking like, check this out, looks like this. See? It's all necrotic. It's all broken. It's all nasty. Healthy? Not healthy, because it's been destroyed. Now when that cell gets like this, now it's starting to bring in a bunch of fluid. And now, can't move. Can't exchange oxygen. You can't exchange oxygen. Your lungs are literally dying with fluid. Everything is crushed in there. You can't breathe. You're literally suffocating underwater. If you've ever had like a breathing attack where you can't, I can't catch my breath. I can't catch my breath. That's what happens with this coronavirus. That's how it kills you. All right, so this is 80% of people, right? 80% are going to have like flu-like symptoms, bad flu. And then 3% of people, I know this is morbid, 3% will die. Okay, you guys follow me here? People go, Dr. Vuong, what happens between, like, how do we get from here to here? All right, well, the bridge to get from here to die, there's a bridge, and that bridge is pneumonia, specifically leading to something called ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. And now, like, your lung can't move, and you can't exchange oxygen, and now you can't breathe, and now it's just like the pimp holding your head underwater. You can't breathe. So how do you treat ARDS? Dr. Vuong, once you start having respiratory problems, like you can't breathe, you're gasping for air, the timeline is really fast, right? If you ever get to this point, your doctor is going to come in and say something like this: we are really worried that your mom is going to tire out. If you hear that, the next thing that's going to come is, we need to put a breathing tube in your mom. We need to breathe for her. We need to put her on a ventilator. We need to put her on a respirator. We don't have enough ventilators to handle this small amount of people who are going to need it. Trust me. Today's March 23rd. And you have to think about this, because a month ago, none of y'all even heard of coronavirus. A month ago, Italy was walking around all happy and easygoing. So they're overwhelmed, right?
And he's just talking about the average across all age groups. For older people or people with compromised immune systems, it can be way higher.
In any hospital, the capacity to treat patients is limited by how many beds they have. Think of this as the number of beds in your local hospital at any given time. A couple are already filled by patients receiving treatment for things like a car accident injury or a stroke. And this dot represents one person who's healthy and decides to go out like usual. They jump on the subway and head into the office where they catch COVID-19. But they don't feel sick right away and might not for several days. So later they go to a basketball game where they unknowingly infect 2 or 3 more people. Most of these people will have relatively mild cases, but one might be an elderly person with a severe case who will eventually have to go to the hospital. But these 3, who are all infected but don't feel sick, go out again, on the subway, into the office, and then out after work, infecting several more people, 20% of whom will need to go to the hospital. Over a short period of time, this process multiplies the number of people going to the hospital each day. Before long, the hospital is full and a crisis begins. People with severe cases of COVID-19 can't get treatment, and some who could be saved die. Plus, people with other issues can't get treatment either, and some of them die. This surge of severe cases causes avoidable deaths. That's what happened in South Korea, Iran, and Italy, all of which went from 100 to more than 5,000 cases in less than 2 weeks. A lot of people died because they couldn't get into the hospitals. This surge is made up of only severe cases, but it was generated by people who didn't feel sick, spreading the disease in public. Which means the people who can do the most to avoid these unnecessary deaths are these people. And that means all of us. To slow the virus down, you need to act as if you already have it. By avoiding public transportation, the office, crowded places, and even small social gatherings, you decrease your chances of both getting the disease and spreading it. This is called social distancing. But fewer severe cases show up to the hospital each day, never overwhelming the system. 2 ways the COVID-19 pandemic can play out. But this one only happens if everyone does their part. In 1918, the cities of Philadelphia and St. Louis were both hit by a flu pandemic, but they responded in different ways. In Philadelphia, health officials allowed a huge parade to go ahead, while in St. Louis, officials prepared. They closed schools, theaters, and bars. Philadelphia's hospitals were overwhelmed, and many more died as a result. But St. Louis was able to avoid those excessive deaths. 100 years later, these are the 2 scenarios we face.
Well, tell everybody what you do, Michael.
My job is not to scare you out of your wits, it's to scare you into your wits. We're not going to have a vaccine anytime soon. That's happy talk. The hand sanitizers actually are a great thing for stopping a lot of infectious diseases. They actually are really good. They're good for your hands, in terms of the skin. They kill the bad bugs. But the whole issue of using your hands, touching your face that people all concentrate on,
Yes.
the data is actually very weak that this kind of virus is going to be transmitted that way. So I wouldn't tell you to stop using hand sanitizers, but don't think it's going to have a big impact on this bug. I'm giving you my best shot at it. It's not going to make much difference.
Damn.
Sorry. I think the primary thing about hand washing is legitimate, but one of the things people want to do something. They want to be able to feel like they're doing something, and so we tell them, wash your hands often and to prevent this disease. And I feel like we're not being really honest with the people, that the data, and we've looked at this very carefully, really is about just breathing air, and that's a hard thing to stop. So keep doing the hand washing, but don't think that that's going to stop this disease. But you asked about the
It's
mask.
going to stop other stuff. Yes,
Yeah,
masks.
Well, there's 2 kinds.
Right.
Basically the surgical mask, which just fits over. And the reason it's called a surgical mask is because it's loose-fitting, just fits, kind of ties behind you. It was worn by surgeons so that they don't cough or drip into your wound.
Right.
And it was never made to protect you from bugs coming in. So those little spaces on the sides, that's not a problem if I'm breathing into the cloth right in front of my nose. But in terms of the air coming in on the side, they're not effective at all. So people wear them, they look like they're doing something, they're not. Now, if you are sick, they may help a little bit from you transmitting, because if you cough, then you cough right into that cloth and some of it will embed in there and not get out around. The other one, though, is called an N95 respirator. But for all intents and purposes, it looks like a mask. It's just tight face-fitting. It has a seal, even at the nose, etc.
That's an apocalypse mask.
Rudyard Kipling.
Am the dawn comes up like thunder water. China crossed the bay. China.
We said,
Did you put that in there because you really thought that a lot of this stuff was going to come out of China, or was that just because it's a great quote?
No, this is exactly what we're talking about.
Why China?
It's incredible. I've hunted my life. I love to fly fish. I love the outdoors. Okay, I could never have imagined the animals. I've spent time in these markets. I remember one day spending a day in the Bangkok, Thailand market, and it was about a mile by a mile and a half wild big. In these tight aisles. Every animal imaginable to humans, and I swear to God there were some out of the movies, I think, that were in there. And they're all just right on top of each other. China's been a bacterial and viral soup vessel for a long time. That's, again, why we have to protect ourselves here, because a bug anywhere in the world today can be a bug everywhere tomorrow. Because they have this incredibly large population, 2 billion. They've got this food supply that is largely wildlife that comes into these markets where there's this incredible contact between people and these animals. And now with the shutdown and what's happening with this, and this is what I talked about in the book, why I was so concerned, because we are at risk. So even this situation as it unfolds, it's not just about what the virus does to you, it's about what the entire system is rigged up to be and what this virus does once it gets into it. We prepare all the time well in advance. We don't build an aircraft carrier at the moment we think we're going to go to battle. We look at what all do we need. We don't do that in public health. We've tried. And so, you know what? Stockpiling 500 million of these N95s would have been the difference between night and day. And when you look at the price of one of those versus one airplane, not even close. And they found that at that very moment, when they first got sick, they had incredibly high levels of virus, sometimes 10,000 times that we saw with SARS, in their throats, meaning they were infectious at that point already, and they hadn't even had symptoms yet of really any nature. They weren't coughing yet.
Wow.
And that's where we're concerned, because that's the kind of transmission. It's, I always have said, trying to stop influenza virus transmission like trying to stop the wind. We've never had anything successfully do that other than vaccine, and we don't have a vaccine here. So the bottom line message is we can't wait until the crisis to fix these things. You know what? We spend about 0.0001% on public health compared to our Defense Department, and yet look how vulnerable. It's the bugs. It's not a war.
Yeah.
It's not a missile. It's bringing down the world economy right now.
Yeah.
It's a darn virus.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think, and that's what I tried to say in my book, was all about that. I went into what we needed to do. In fact, I hate it when people come up and say, we're screwed. My whole bottom line is, well, what are you going to do about it then? What happens is just from the time you breathe it in and what you mix it with the air there, it's kind of like taking a cup of hot water and putting it into a bathtub of cold water. And so what happens by the time you get done, it's not that hot. And so in this case, your lungs couldn't stand even 110 to 20 degree heat without causing real severe damage. And so it doesn't kill the virus at all. If we'd had a vaccine for this, or one that even worked partially, think how different we'd be. And you know what? We got other ones coming like this. We have to use our creative imagination. As I said in the book, the chapter on coronaviruses, the title is SARS and MERS, a harbinger of things to come.
Yeah.
We can use our creative imagination to say we should be funding these things almost like we pay for our fire department. Imagine if we had to go out and buy a fire truck when the 911 call came in.
Yes.
We need to do it now. I can make a vaccine for it overnight. The question is it safe and effective?
Besides, what do you think you have an immune system for? It's for killing germs. But it needs practice. It needs germs to practice on. So if you kill all the germs around you and live a completely sterile life, then when germs do come along, you're not gonna be prepared. And never mind ordinary germs. What are you gonna do when some super virus comes along that turns your vital organs into liquid shit? I'll tell you what you're gonna do. You're gonna get sick, you're gonna die, and you're gonna deserve it because you're fucking weak and you got a fucking weak immune system.
The seasonal flu, just a little over 1. And COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus, just about 2. That difference between the flu and COVID-19 doesn't seem so big, especially when you look at them next to these really contagious diseases. Plus, a lot of the symptoms of the flu and COVID-19 are really similar. A fever, cough, they can even both lead to pneumonia, which is ultimately how they can both be fatal. So thinking of COVID-19 and the flu as similar is a common and frankly understandable comparison to want to make. But wait, let's go back to those R0 numbers again. If the flu has an R0 of 1.3, that means each person gets either 1 or 2 people sick. After 10 rounds, that's 56 total people. And if we run the model with COVID-19's R0 at 2, if one person with it gets 2 people sick who get 2 people sick, after 10 rounds, that's more than 2,000 people. This does not happen with the flu. Every year, the seasonal flu kills as many as 60,000 Americans. As of late March, COVID-19 has killed about 34,000 across the whole world. But scientists expect that number to go up, way up. The first really big difference between COVID-19 and the flu is how long it takes you to feel sick. From the moment you're infected with COVID-19, it usually takes 5 days before you start to feel symptoms. But it can take as long as 12 or even 14 days. This is the incubation period, the time between when you catch it and when you first realize you're sick. And scientists think you could be contagious during most of this period. The flu, by comparison, has an average incubation period of just 2 days. You get sick, and pretty soon you feel sick, and you know you're contagious. This is what we're used to. But COVID-19 flips that around. You can be contagious and spreading it around for several days and up to 2 weeks before it even occurs to you that you're sick. And that leads to the next big difference. In flu season, there's always a number of people in the population who are already immune to the flu. That can be because they got their flu shot, or maybe they've already had that flu strain. And that limits the spread of the virus. When one person is contagious with the flu, they can only spread it to people who aren't immune, who can only spread it to other people who aren't immune. That's why scientists and doctors urge us to get our flu shot every year. If enough people have immunity, they can kind of shield the virus from reaching others. The more immunized people, the more they can protect those that are susceptible to the virus.
As humans organize themselves into larger, more densely populated cities, the potential for infectious disease becomes ever more present. Massive urban areas are like a ticking time bomb for infection, with humans, animals, food, garbage, and sewage stacked tightly on top of each other. It sets the stage for the perfect breeding ground for disease. Our ancient ancestors lived in small, isolated tribes that had very little opportunity to spread germs beyond their community. But after the advent of agriculture, tribes abandoned their nomadic lifestyles and organized into stationary civilizations. Since the dawn of civilization, mankind has dealt with epidemics, plagues, and pandemics. For most of history, city life consisted of overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Food would often be prepared next to open sewers, while rats, cockroaches, and rotting corpses polluted the drinking water. Tight living quarters gave rise to the spread of zoonotic diseases, which are contagions transferred from animals to humans, such as COVID-19. Zoonotic diseases have been around since the earliest cities, but they would not become pandemics because these cities were isolated from one another. Once civilizations expanded into vast trading empires, the possibility for widespread disease was unleashed. In 1347, ships returned to the shores of Sicily filled with sailors stricken by a mysterious illness that formed dark swellings, or buboes, in the armpits and groin. This symptom led to the nickname Black Death. The Venetians banned sailors from entering their cities for 40 days. In Italy, this was called 40 giorni, which means 40 days, and explains where we get the word quarantine in English. While these quarantine efforts did help to deter the outbreak, in the end, the Black Death took up to 200 million lives across Eurasia. And perhaps we are still feeling the after effect of the horrendous Spanish flu to this day. Spanish flu impacted young adults the hardest. Half of those that died were between the ages of 20 and 40, and 99% were under the age of 65. By the end of 1920, Spanish flu claimed the lives of 50 to 100 million.
If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes.
Well, this is a nightmare scenario because
human-to-human transmissible respiratory viruses can grow exponentially. And so, we've had to use quarantine, which is a old thing back from the days of the plague, as our primary tool. Fortunately, if we use that well enough, we can look at some degree of opening back up. And so, like China, there'll be a partial opening up, which some jobs will resume, school will resume, but we'll have to be very, very careful not to have the rebound until the vaccine comes.
Including the U.S. back in 2015, largely ignored your warnings. Why do you think that was?
Well, it's hard to put money into something where you don't know if it's going to happen. We do for fires because, we've seen that over time. We do for war, in fact, $600 billion a year. In that case, what would have been required, is nothing like that. The ability to make a test super quickly, the ability to know a library of drugs that would work for this, ability to have the vaccine very quickly. I am sure after this, which is just such a gigantic impact, that we will put that money in. But between 2015 and 2020, less than 5% of what should have been done was done. But people didn't get that this is the biggest single threat that, could disrupt our way of life, and give us some time to get both the drugs and advance the vaccine. It is fair to say things won't go back to truly normal until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to basically the entire world.